Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon. In the last part we started off the Zangetsu-Solo semi-ultimate mode run, and now we're actually going to go finish it off. Like I said, last part, the second and third playthroughs are going to be a bit abridged in that while the main run was 3 parts, this is going to be 2 parts for each of the secondary runs. Mostly just due to jump cutting past a good bit of the stage. This stage makes the case for, if you're ever going to kill someone, Miriam is a decent choice to kill as Zangetsu, just because the mid-air slash attack is very good for any projectile-based opponents, particularly the purple variants of these enemies that shoot projectiles out at you. You can just slash the projectiles out of the air with no worry about your safety. Whereas with Zangetsu's normal slash, or any of the other characters really, hitting that projectile while also making sure you don't get hit by it is, let's say, uncommon to do successfully. Honestly, when it comes to choices for who to kill for this run, or for any of the other endings that I'll talk about towards the end of the video, I will say no matter what, never kill Gebel, honestly. Because while the dash has its uses for distance-based jumps, I'd argue you could do better with just having Gebel alive and using the bat transformation. The only time I'd say you should ever kill Gebel is if you're doing this particular run, or technically ultimate mode, but even then, ultimate mode is just this without the allies to rescue. I do have to wonder, though, because this is partially due to the nature of the ending we'll be seeing at the end of the part, but I legitimately wonder if anyone's first run of this game was this particular playstyle. Because the game doesn't tell you outright that you can kill your allies unless you look into the achievements list, of course. So I have to wonder if anyone did do that. I mean, obviously, like a lot of averages, someone had to have, but I feel like, honestly, this isn't the best way to experience the game the first time, so if they did, I kind of feel bad for them. Also, just to show the strategy for the Poltergeist fights when you're playing as Zangetsu alone, jump slashes or the chain whip's going to be your way to go for this. Otherwise, I guess double jump with the slashes. Actually, no, that's about all you can do now that I think about it, because he doesn't have many high-reaching attacks. Yeah. It's always the thing with the games that have multiple playstyles that can lead to different endings like this. Like, you of course have the one that's what most people are probably going to have on their first playthrough be the ending. Like, in this case, it was what we saw back in part 3. Then you got stuff like Undertale, where people are probably not going to get pacifist, but they're not going to get genocide. I forget what the middle ending is called, if there even is one. Would you believe that despite the game's complete pop culture influence, I have never played Undertale? I own it. It's sitting in my Steam library. I'm giving it a big, like, not stink eye, but like curious, adamant eye, I suppose, right now. It's not even out of a lack of interest. It's just I've had other things to play. My big game of that type, and I think I've briefly mentioned this before, but of the whole asynchronous to the rest of its genre sort of game that I played was One Shot. Just because, first off, cat person as the main character, it's that's just cute. But also, I just dug its atmosphere quite a bit more. Also, if you've recruited them and they're still alive on this pathway, if you took it for some reason with them, Miriam and Gebel can actually attack that platform just below the staircase to unveil a slide path. So if you have them and you just want to skip fighting that one enemy for some reason, you can. But as you can tell, Gebel just makes that entire stage easier because you get to skip like 3 rooms there. And Rialphus as Zangetsu is a bit of a thing just due to the fact that the boss is constantly out of your reach. The only way you can reach it during this particular phase where it's just walking back and forth is by using the chain whip. The only other time you really have a lot of time to damage it during is when it's just standing there during this particular phase before it goes and starts its loop over again. One thing I think, I actually forgot to mention this back in part 2 or 3 whenever we fought this, but when we get toward the end of the fight, I am going to say seizure warning. because its desperation attack is flashy to say the least. I forgot to mention that back in part 2 or 3, and I even forgot to edit it in, but I feel like better late than never, at least. It's actually one of the first times I've ever successfully jumped over that attack. I just don't often find it worth jumping over, because I usually just have more than enough health at this point. And as usual, to avoid the desperation attack, just stand off to either side. I'm taking the hard way about this for some reason and going all the way over here to the left. Oh wait, no, I'm waiting to jump over him. That's right. You know, sometimes I stupefy myself in that I record these within relatively short time of me recording the commentary, and yet sometimes I can just completely forget what the hell I'm doing. God forbid I ever do an LP of a game as big as Xenoblade. I would be lost. Especially given my more modern tendency to finish the gameplay recording and then do the commentary. I wouldn't be able to do that for a game that long. Stage 6, as with the previous few, there's not much different at this point, because thanks to Zangetsu's techniques, we can actually take a pathway fairly similar to the one I took back in the first playthrough here. Though the most important thing is that you can also grab the power-up in this stage as Zangetsu alone. Though I should note, it's only if you have the double jump ability from killing Alfred, because you want to kind of loop your way around this platform doing that. If you're playing as Zangetsu and you haven't gotten any powers, I actually don't think there's a single power-up you can grab in that case, now that I think about it. Zangetsu-Solo is a run and a half, and also one of the ones I'm not doing more on that. About what, 10 minutes maybe? Something I will say about this game though that I find very intriguing is that, partially just due to, I don't want to say like I'm too good, but my relative skill at these kind of games compared to the stage structure and such, there are some pathways I've still never seen outside of looking at a map. Not to the extent of lack of exploration compared to maybe Sonic 3 and Knuckles, where I swear I find a new route every single third playthrough maybe, but still, my point stands. Bloodless as Zangetsu-Solo is a slower fight than with Alfred, to say the least, because having the lightning sub-weapon really just does make the bosses a non-issue until the final boss in the normal runs. Chain Whip's gonna want to be your weapon of choice here just because you can hit her from a larger vantage point. But otherwise, honestly, I'd actually recommend jump slashes over the normal slashes here because you could at least have a better chance of jumping back to another platform, and then you can easily put yourself back to another save point. Something I also think I forgot to mention during the first run of this boss fight is that you can tell she's about to attack based off her laughter. She always does laughter, attack, laughter, attack, laughter, attack. I still don't know how you're supposed to dodge this tornado. Again, I think you're supposed to stand off to the opposite extreme and then get to the top umbrella, but hell if I know. And with that, we're on to Stage 7, which is arguably the worst. Oh, well, it is the hardest stage in the game, even on the normal run, but arguably the worst when playing as Zangetsu-Solo. Just due to the fact that, especially on veteran mode, the amount of bottomless pits partner with knockback and your extraordinarily, let's say, aggressive jumping potential as powered up Zangetsu means you will be flying all over the place. That said, you can still grab the armor, so you can take less damage going forward, and that's going to be very useful towards the end game. I don't know why. I remember when I first played the game, when I first got to this stage, and I saw they basically had Yoku blocks from Mega Man. I know that's technically only from Mega Man Unlimited that they're called that, but it's better to call them that to me than reappearing, disappearing blocks. I kind of had a moment where I just kind of lost my shit and had to pause the game and laugh for a few minutes because I just can't escape this type of stage gimmick. Partially because it's just a very common platforming gimmick, don't get me wrong, but like, in that particular switching on and off segment, it just, I always laugh seeing it. This is probably still the worst screen in the game, by the way. Well, no, actually, no, it's one later on. What am I talking about? This is a new path. We actually haven't seen this yet. Though this is also a contender for worst room in the game, because the fairy enemies combined with the conveyor belts makes damaging them and jumping over the pits surprisingly tense for what that is. Ultimately, though, the stage is, the screen is relatively short, so you don't have to worry too much. It's interesting, though, looking at this game's stage design, because in some ways, it kind of feels like what would happen if you took the Symphony of the Night Metroid-like approach and applied that kind of multiple pathway thing to the classic Castlevania level design. I just find that kind of stuff very intriguing when it comes to level design and sacrificing shortcuts over difficulty, so on and so forth. It's one of the coolest things about game design to me is level design. And it's something that Mega Man fans are surprisingly good at, or at least when they dedicate themselves enough to actually make a fan game. There's very few awful Mega Man fan games that I've played or seen. I'm not a big fan of Sprite game myself, just because, like, don't get me wrong, I curse like a sailor, but that game was a bit just like, what the hell? Also, a nice little detail that I didn't mention during the first playthrough is that if you pay attention to the backgrounds of the stages throughout the game, the moon is in a lot of them, and it's slowly but surely getting closer and closer to being a full moon where it is in the final stage. That's just cool. I'm a big sucker for little attentions to detail like that. It's one of the reasons I love Symphony of the Night so much, because they're all over the goddamn place in that game. But it's just so cool. I know there's the obvious, like, potential meme, potential of visual storytelling here, but I can't see that without thinking of any of those posts you see on Twitter where there's, like, a bunch of batter in a pan and a cat paw print in it because, ooh, there's a story there, wow. Bothan was already my favorite boss during the main run, but as Zangetsu-Solo, honestly, he gets even more of a highlight to me, because he starts to feel more like an absurd Mega Man Zero boss fight in a way, just with sub-weapons. Mind you, I'm also just a sucker for any fights that happen in library-type settings. And from what I've heard, I would really like Ritual of the Night for that regard. I'll get it probably sometime this year. Though, my game backlog has only been getting larger recently because I'm looking at my PS4 stuff right now. I just finished most of the Kingdom Hearts 3 DLC the other day. But I also have to get through Death Stranding, Indivisible. Yakuza 6 is waiting there, but I'm waiting until I can get a physical copy of 3 through 5's remaster and such. There's just never enough time in the world. But now we're on to the final stage. And an interesting little thing you can notice coming up here is the name of the stage actually changes if you're playing as Zangetsu-Solo, be it without powers or completely powered up. It goes from being Stage 8 Curse of the Moon to Cleave the Moon. I believe that's a partial pun on Zangetsu's name because, like, there's some character in his name that can be read as Cleave if it uses a different character set or something like that. It's one of those very Japanese puns that you see all over the place in games. This stage, though, doesn't change too much, if at all. The only reason I'm showing off this particular screen is because, just to show you that the jump slash really is very effective for dodging these kind of things. I'm even going to jump the refill stations because at this point, you saw that level design. Let's just get to the actual reason that we're in the stage, the final boss. I recommend bringing in the Ashura sub-weapon, even though I really don't think that's what it's called. It's just what I've always called it because I can't think of anything else it would be called. Aura, maybe? Just to get some extra damage in it, but I don't recommend spamming it during the first phase because after the first one wears off, the Gremory is low enough on HP that you can just use jump slashes, potentially hitting it twice, that you can take her out relatively quickly. That, and you're gonna want to save as much ammo as you can for Phase 2. Be it for using the Aura Ashura sub-weapon, or in the case you get one from the lamps that drop from the spear attacks, the Chain Whip. The pattern here is exactly the same. There's no actual differences. Technically. The end of the fight's going to play out a little bit differently, but I'll get to that when the time comes. But I will say, out of all the ways to fight this boss fight, despite me not liking playing as Zangetsu-Solo for the most part, this boss fight as Zangetsu-Solo is completely worth it to me, because it feels right, fighting this kind of boss with this kind of moveset. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the kind of games I played over the years. I don't know. Ah, I got the Chain Whip. Damn it. The good news is, thanks to Zangetsu's abilities, if you actually time your jump correctly... Actually, no, this isn't just a Zangetsu thing. You could have done this in the main playthrough even. With the Gremory, if you jump off the platforms on either side early, she'll start aiming her laser at the side you were just at instead, meaning you can actually get to the other platforms and get some more hits in just in case you want to be greedy like that. Which, if anyone who plays Smash with me knows, I can be intensely greedy like that. The Chain Whip is overall better than the Aura ability, I would estimate here, though, just because you can get more hits in with it. This attack is completely a joke to dodge Zangetsu alone, by the way. I should really stop calling it Zangetsu alone. This is, at this point, this is Ultimate Mode, just barring the changes to the Ultimate and Nightmare Mode boss fights, which I'll get into as we go in Nightmare Mode. With the exception of this boss, actually. I should probably talk about that real quick. For reasons that we'll get into in a couple of parts, we don't fight this boss during my third playthrough for this LP, second in recording Nightmare Mode. And because of that, on Ultimate Mode, this fight does change. Not so much in the first phase as it does in the second phase here. The yellow sides will move much closer to you before they stop and begin their second movement. The pinkish sides are just overall faster, so you need to watch out for that. And the Moon Flare attack, or whatever it is, the thing she just did, it's a lot more quickly, so you need to be careful about the explosion. Just make sure you're moving as soon as you can. And I don't know what it is as well, but for some reason playing as Zangetsu, I almost feels like this boss has more health, but I think it just might be the playstyle. Either way, we have one last new thing here, which is charging up one last Moon Throw attack. I think you need to hold the attack button or hold up here to slowly charge up. And then when you're fully charged, press the square button to unleash havoc. The man who wished for nothing other than the power to eradicate demons spent his final days in abject misery. There were none left to pity nor mourn for he whose heart became dominated by darkness. Zangetsu now reigned as the new Dark Emperor. A long, horrible night descended upon the land. Bad ending. Who knew if you kill everyone you could potentially love, you're probably not going to live a good life. That was the Emperor of Darkness ending, might I add. And before I even get into the other ones, the first ending we saw back in Part 3 was Those Left Behind. But that's the Zangetsu-Solo, technically Ultimate Mode run. It's a fun playstyle, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it could have just been that bit more if they had changed the way the dash worked a little bit. And ultimately, I just don't think it's as interesting as either the two other notable playstyles because you're just limited that much. I'm sure it's someone's favorite mode, but not for me too much. But as I mentioned a couple times, there are 6 endings in this game, but over the course of this LP, I'm only showing off 3. That's because the other 3 are more or less variations on what we just did. There is that man Zangetsu's ending, which is killing at least one ally, and then completely ignoring the other 2. There is Nightmare's End, which is ignoring all 3 allies completely, not killing them, not recruiting them, just walking past them, which... And then there's Blade Gleaming at Sunrise, which is killing at least one of the partners, recruiting one other, and then doing whatever the hell you want with the last one. For that particular playthrough, I'd recommend killing Alfred, because the double jump's that worth it, but the mobility you also get from Gebel and Miriam makes traversing the stages that much easier, plus you still get a good amount of attack potential in that particular playthrough. And as for killing at least one ally and ignoring the other 2, if you had to choose one there, it's either Alfred or Miriam, I'd say, just, again, for mobility's sake. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 6, we're going to go start off the final playthrough, Nightmare Mode. See you guys then.